The air along the rocky flank of Isandlwana shivers with heat. A wind off the Natal plain carries fine dust through the jagged koppies, threaded with the tang of tanned hide and sun-warmed metal. From far away a cadence gathers, not quite sound, more a sensation, feet striking dry earth, shields brushing leather, the heartbeat of something drawing near. At noon on 22 January 1879, in this hard-angled place, history sharpens to a blade. On paper, what is coming should be impossible. A column of empire, Martini Henry, rifles, rockets, artillery faces, men bearing cowhide shields, and the short-stabbing Ikliwa. Logistics figures, scouting notes, ammunition tallies, everything appears to favor the British. Yet war is not fought on paper. It is fought on the ground, in the cadence of breath, and in the discrepancy between what is seen and what is understood. Isandlwana is more than a name. It is a problem in geometry. A ridge falls to the saddle, then pinches at the neck, where every track narrows into a single throat. On such ground, numbers cease to be an absolute advantage. Angles become destiny. An overlong firing line is an invitation, and a neglected gap turns at once into a road curling behind your back. The Zulu do not advance as a crowd. They move like a living creature with intention, the head fixing the foe, the chest driving frontally, the loins held in reserve, the horns opening their quiet arc. Within the discipline of the Amabutho, under the patient hand of Ntshingwayo kaMahole, doctrine ceases to be a diagram. It becomes a heartbeat, conceal, restrain, then release at the moment the enemy's volleys slow, and distance becomes your blade. Not far from the tents and the wagon line, a choice has already hardened before the first shot. Lord Chelmsford has split his strength in pursuit of speed and initiative. The space that choice creates does not show on the written order, yet it is present on every slope, in each blind fold of ground, in every broken line of sight. An army is only as strong as the weakest angle in its understanding. In the next 60 minutes, one order will cleave the British not by the volume of command, but by the slow chemistry of terrain, discipline, and the distance between information and meaning. The horns will close without flourish. The head holds, the chest presses, the loins stand firm, the horns curl through the saddle and tighten at the neck. The question before us is not simply who wins, but how a decision hardens into fate. Look again at Isandlwana, sharp stone, fine dust, silhouettes wavering in the heat. When that far-off cadence aligns with your own pulse, you begin to grasp why war refuses the certainties of printed numbers. From this moment, we will follow a chain of choices, each one a cut in rock, toward the hour when the horns of the buffalo complete their circle. Dawn over the Natal plain is thin as smoke. Around Isandlwana, the koppies throw broken shadows. The saddle cuts a shallow line across the ridge, and the neck tightens like the neck of a bottle terrain, with a quiet, decisive shape. Weeks earlier, an ultimatum had shut the doors of negotiation. Now the arrows of invasion have crossed the river, 3 axes driving into the Zulu kingdom. On the central line, no. 3 column has pitched its camp beneath Isandlwana, a sea of white tents like boats at anchor on still water, apparently safe, in truth floating at the lip of a whirl. The morning carries the clean scent of wild grass and iron, the clatter of hooves, clipped orders, the scratch of pen on paper. On Lord Chelmsford's table, the map lies open like a chessboard. Lines of supply, distances, timetables, scouting reports. Everything suggests speed, move fast, strike early, intercept a suspected Zulu force somewhere out ahead. The decision comes with the confidence of arithmetic. Split the strength. One part will run down the target, the other will hold the camp, guard the wagon line and the ammunition. On the page, the calculation convinces. On the ground, it creates a space no one fully sees. That space does not appear on the order. It lives in the folds of the land. A low rise masking a slope, a line of sight broken by rock, a shallow channel stitching 2 dry basins. Here, straight lines bow to clever angles. A line of fire stretched thin pays in reloading time. A wagon park set a little wrong turns each cartridge into a breathless errand. Every figure holds true until the wind shifts and visibility loses half a step. On the other side of the page not printed in the British camp, stands the quiet order of the Amabutho. Ntshingwayo kaMahole reads the ground the way a skilled carpenter reads wood. Which way the grain runs, where the knotted parts will split. He does not need to smash the power of rifles. He needs only to break their rhythm. The head fixes, the chest presses, the loins hold, the horns swing, wide doctrine born of seasons rather than ink, fastened to feet and eyesight. If an enemy thins his own line, if he leaves a neck exposed on his own map, the hour will come without noise, only with precision. Among the tents are the ordinary faces of mourning. A man fastening a button, someone stirring black coffee, a sergeant counting cartridges, and a book with frayed edges. None of them can see the full depth of the choice just signed. A strong column can be weakened not by a lack of rifles, but by asking the wrong question. Where are they? Instead of, by what angle will they come? The ground answers slowly, but it answers without mercy. Lord Chelmsford rides out with the pursuing wing, leaving a white basin of canvas at the foot of Isandlwana. Stillness deceives. It invites the belief that time is on your side, that reports will arrive in time, that ammunition will flow where it should. But time is not neutral here. Each passing minute cuts a new serration into the blade of the terrain. The copies nip away at sightlines, the saddle gathers the paths, and the neck, if missed by even a beat, becomes a door slammed shut. Before noon, the British camp works with the comfort of habit. Flags clean, tent line straight, wagon line laid out like squares on a board. The neatness is handsome, but it assumes the enemy will enter from the center of the picture. And Ntshingwayo does not draw that way. He draws from the edges, using the edges to bend the picture inward. And Isandlwana, with its geometry, is ready for such a drawing. As the sun climbs the width of a finger, the simple game of move fast and strike early starts to change its meaning. From the split of strength, a chain of consequences begins to touch the ground. A firing line longer than planned, an ammunition run broken by small blind folds, a new blind angle opening on the right. All of it still belongs to the near future, but the future, especially on a battlefield, runs faster than our plans. And in the thread-thin interval between being informed and truly understanding, the outcome has already begun to flow. The midday light blurs the grain of Isandlwana's slopes, and out on the rim of the plain, the patrol under Raw and Roberts checks as if a horse had balked at emptiness. From behind a low rise, a fine dust lifts not wind but breath. Zulu figures rise out of the tall grass, ranks unfolding with the ground, as if the hill itself were parting along a seam. The warning runs back to camp like an arrow, yet in those precious minutes the distance between seen and understood remains a full stride. The sight is read as a mass to be blocked, not as an army opening the angle. Cole? Anthony Durnford arrives, leans from the saddle, and takes in the white spread of tents and the wagon line. He drives his mounted men and the native horse forward, biting at the exposed Zulu left. Dust kicks up behind the hooves. Steady shots cut the wind. The thrust is necessary, and it also begins a tug of war the British do not know they are playing. Each reload of the Martini Henry pinches the lungs. Each yard lost to the enemy brings the fight one breath closer to the camp. Inside the perimeter, Lieutenant Call, Henry Pauline thins and lengthens the firing line to cover the breadth of the front, stretching it like a sun-bleached cord. Extend open, hold your pace. Sounds correct, but on the ground every foot of extension is another foot between a man and his ammunition. Cartridges move by hand from the wagons, person to person, along a route suddenly broken by little folds of blind ground. Ammunition travels slower than heat, and heat outruns the firing rhythm. Out ahead, at a thin threshold between confidence and fear, the air fills with black powder smoke. Volley follows volley. The drill voice merges with the click-bang-ram of the mechanism. But all machines tire. Sweat slicks the wood, throats go dry, and the pauses between volleys lengthen by a beat, then another. In that sliver of time, the horns begin to move where the eye trusts the ridge to be empty. The right horn slides on a long arc, using the hill as a curtain. The frontal weight pins the gaze to the wrong place. Durnford checks, then bleeds back into a shallow donga, a dry cut deep enough for men and horses to steal a few breaths. The riders fire and fall back by turns, trying to stretch time like a string already under too much pull. Behind them, the companies on Pauline's line must turn to face both front and flank, and in that motion, the phrase, "a thin line against a thick angle," stops being a metaphor and becomes the exact shape of the field. Some will say Isandlwana fell to surprise. It did not. There were sightings, a dark smear on a slope, a column of dust tugging at the horizon, a rank of shields showing and then fading. The error lay in the reading. Which beat was bait and which was closure, which piece of ground was empty and which was the tightening noose. When cartridges turn into urgent errands, when each volley needs an extra breath to steady, the battlefield becomes a lens knocked off true. The British still look, but they no longer look right. By the time the sun stands higher, A small change begins to work like a long lever. The volleys slow by half a step. The distance closes by half a step. The voices out beyond grow sharper by half a step. And that half step is enough to break the forward screen. There are still targets to the front, but somewhere off the hand a fresh plume has risen. Somewhere to the rear a harmless-looking runnel has linked into a road. As the line opens to see farther, sight itself begins to deceive. From this moment the field is no longer a story of straight lines. It is the story of an angle coming shut. The fighting engine that had seemed so steady begins to shriek at its smallest cogs. The run of cartridges from the wagon line to the men. Ammunition is not absent. It simply fails to be present where and when it must. Givers, runners, hands passing box to hand, each link crosses folds of blind ground and ribbons of heat that blur distance. At noon, when the air hangs like a curtain, every box becomes a breathless errand, and each errand adds a longer hush to the line. Some will mutter about cartridge box lids, but at Isandlwana, the drag on tempo is more than a lid, it is distance, the clutter of a supply path, the stretching of a formation until even the shortest way becomes the long way round. Cole, Anthony Durnford still worries the exposed flank, yielding by degrees into a dry cut to keep rhythm and breath for men and horses. At the center, Lieutenant Cole, Henry Pauline sees the front pulled thin like a sun-bleached cord, and is forced to choose what no one likes to choose. Refuse the right to buy time. On a map, this is a neat fold. On the ground, it is a real slackening of the body, giving a space to save the rest. As the right folds in, the center stands revealed, and the shouting from ahead, which had only grazed the ear, hardens to a blade. At the foot of the ridge, the saddle shows as a trough of earth, and beyond it lies the neck, the only exit. From there, roads fan outward. From here, every path must thread a single throat. With reports arriving in tatters and lines of sight chewed by stone, Pauline faces three ways: hold and die by the slowing of fire, close into the wagons and nurse the flow of cartridges, or break through the neck and preserve a living force. The right answer ought to belong to time, but time now has taken sides. Each minute adds another serration to the blade of the ground. Companies pivot to face both front and flank. Every turn of the body is a flashing gap. Ammunition carriers gasp and pass the brass along as if passing water through a growing fire. On the far rise, the right horn has completed half its arc, using the hill as its screen. In front, the head continues to pin the gaze so that orders keep pointing straight. When the center sinks into uneven patches and the shooter needs a longer breath to quiet the barrel, the break ceases to be a word. It becomes the exact sensation of earth slipping under boot. The rifles still speak in short bursts, but the pause between bursts is now longer than a breath. In those breaths lies all the space a doctrine needs. Durnford tries to draw one more inch from the string fire and fall back, fire and fall back. At the center, the cadence calls turn hoarse and blend with the dry wind. The right refuses again to avoid being swallowed whole, and that very refusal turns small groups with their backs toward the saddle. No one names it in that instant, but all understand. Leave now, or the neck will shut. Lord Chelmsford is far out with the pursuing wing, and that distance in this hour stretches beyond all figures once inked on paper. No miracle rides against the sun and dust. When brine gathers at the lip and the stock slicks in the hand, men begin to lose the old measures. 100 yards becomes 2 heartbeats. A minute becomes 1 more volley. Within those unsure units, Isandlwana shows its true shape, a geometry solved by human speed, by the tensile strength of nerves, by choices laid side by side with no time left for debate. As the figures on the right flank spill down along a closing arc, as the space to the front turns heavy like a wall, the only answer left is to break for the neck, but the neck, like every solitary door on a battlefield, always shuts faster than feet can run. From several quarters, the Zulu voices shear into ragged pieces and then lock together on the backs of those withdrawing. Small flags tilt and disappear into dust. Someone still turns once toward the wagon line. Someone else waits for one last burst. When the ground yields its last inch, when the smell of tanned hide and hot iron mixes with dust, all that remains of a plan is the red cut of the horns meeting over the mouth of the trough. No blade declares itself. There is only a single heartbeat slowing and then breaking into many, only the long exhale of a landscape that has waited, patient, for its hour. At Isandlwana, the break does not roar. It is precise, total, and perfectly in rhythm with the body of the place. The neck shuts before anyone can name it. From the right, the figures pour down on a tightening arc. To the front, the open space hardens like a wall. Little knots slip out of the thinning line, feeling for the low runs of ground toward the saddle. Others choose a rock lip, a toppled wagon, a shallow cut, and make their stand not because they cannot withdraw, but because there is nowhere left to go. Shots come ragged, broken in mid-sentence. Between volleys, the breath burns dry, and between breaths lies just enough room for a doctrine that has waited with patience. Call. Anthony Durnford draws the last inches from time, fire and fall back until the string will give no more. At the center, Lieutenant Cole. Henry Pauline watches the formation sink into uneven islands. Every turn to cover one side opens a slit on the other. Ammunition carriers run into the wind, passing brass hand to hand as if pouring water into a blaze that widens with the heat. A man glances once toward the wagon line. Another squeezes off one more burst before he understands that all the familiar measures 100 yards, a minute, a pause have changed their meaning. In the camp, the tents go down. Wood splinters, white canvas whips the air like foam collapsing. Colors gather and vanish into the heavy dust. From several quarters, the Zulu voices shear into ribbons and lock themselves on the backs of the men withdrawing. By now, there is no line to hold, only solitary positions. A rock edge, a subsided patch of ground, a thorny bush. In such places, men fight with the smallest things. A rifle stock slick with sweat, a short ikelwa that needs only a narrow space, a shield thong biting the palm until the skin lets go. Every movement carries weight. Every cadence call shrinks to a word. At the moment the camp is overrun, Isandlwana shows exactly what it has always been. A problem in geometry solved by angle, not by number. The horns meet at the mouth of the trough. The saddle turns into a threshold you can see but cannot cross. All the little paths fall toward it, and every path is hidden by the bodies that must pass. Durnford buys the last few beats and then his measure of time is spent. Elsewhere, Pauline has no order that can outrun the wind, only the knowledge that what remains must be gathered with the body itself. Hold one breath for another man, then one more. No bell declares the end. There is only ululation braided into the dry wind, and then the wind itself is all that remains. In the thick dust you can tell only the nearest motions. A hand catching a wrist, a shoulder braced to a shoulder, one man making space for another to slip by, another turning back for one last shot. By this hour, the cost of decision is no argument. It is names and numbers. Names and numbers. When the ground yields its last inch and the lungs their last loan of air, the battle closes by the geometry that shaped it. Afterward, there is quiet. The shouted names thin and die. The feet still running for the neck fall away like the last drops of rain. On the slope, the solitary stands become fixed, dark points. And among them, the lesson no need to shout stands on its own. Where numbers are mistaken for strength, angle is fate. Where a plan appears complete, the empty space writes the final line. Dust settles more slowly than human breath. On the flanks of Isandlwana, boot marks layer over boot marks, torn canvas snags on low thorn, cowhide shields lie tilted with thong cuts still visible in the palms that held them. After the dry wind and the thinning ululation, the ground itself retells what has just been done. No hand needs to point. The landscape lays out its first lesson. Terrain is a weapon. A ridge falls to the saddle narrows to the neck. Width becomes a throat. Where numbers felt like a guarantee, angle was fate. The head fixed, the chest pressed, the loins held, the horns closed, and all it required was a curve released at the right beat to turn advantage into burden. Amid the fallen tents, it is easy to reach for a tidy answer. But Isandlwana is not the story of a cartridge box lid. The cartridges were there. What failed was time and path. When each round had to be bought with runs through folds of blind ground. Firepower, however, modern still asked for a breath the field would not grant. That is the second lesson. Doctrine overcomes technology when logistics break. The Amabutho kept rhythm, using distance as a blade. The Iklewa needed only a narrow space, and when the volleys slowed by half a step, the rest belonged to feet. Ntshingwayo kaMahole did not need to beat the rifle. He needed to break its rhythm, and he did. Here too, with the dust unwinding, another truth stands out. To see is not to understand. Raw and Robert saw, many other eyes saw. But reports arrived in tatters. Sight lines were chewed by stone, old assumptions smothered new ones, and thus true signs were read out of time. The third lesson belongs less to the glass and more to judgment. Intelligence is only half the road. The other half is timely comprehension. Between where are they and by what angle will they come, a half beat late is a battle lost. If we must speak of the men in these hours, we speak of a chain of choices cut into each other. Lord Chelmsford chose speed and initiative. Lieutenant Colonel Henry Pauline chose to thin and cover the front. Cole, Anthony Durnford chose to bite and buy time. Not all were wrong, and none were quick enough to outrun the clock kept by the earth. On this ground, each choice was half-right tempo decided the other half. When the beat tilted toward the side that read the land better, the ending was already written. Long after the last report fades, Isandlwana keeps the hoarse voice of dust and wind. Names and numbers will be recorded, and they may differ from book to book. What does not change is the shape of the field, and shape bred the outcome. From here the echo rolls down the slope, across the saddle, toward the river and its wooden crossing. Rorke's drift tonight. With mealie bag walls and biscuit box stacks, 140 men will stand in firelight, facing the shadow thrown from Isandlwana. The question is no longer, do they have enough cartridges? But do they have enough tempo and judgment to hold a very narrow angle until morning? And like all stern questions of history, it will be answered not by shouts, but by the quiet between two breaths.